Well, good evening, everyone. We're so glad that you're here and that you're joining us. Go ahead and let us know where you're watching from. And I just want to introduce, this is my friend Ryan. Ryan is actually a counselor from Philadelphia. And Ryan was actually the best friend or best man in our wedding. And so it's just an honor to have Ryan here with us. Anthony's known you, since the nursery? I mean, your whole life. Oh, hold on. There we go. Sorry about that. So just glad to have Ryan here with us. Tonight, we're going to be talking about anxiety and kind of anxiety in this season that we're in. It's just a really weird season that we are all facing, and something that I'm not sure anyone in the 21st century ever thought that we would be facing, being stuck at home and not being allowed to get out, not being allowed to go to work or do kind of the normal life rhythms that we were used to. So whether this is something that you've experienced in the past or something that is new for you, or if you're watching your kids face anxiety right now, you're definitely in the right place. And we are glad to be able to have this conversation with Ryan. So Ryan, will you just tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got involved in everything with counseling and with therapy, and then just tell us a little bit about your family.
Yeah, so I've been working as a therapist for a good 10 years now. My professional path started in college. I was a pastoral studies major at a Christian college, and it didn't take long before I realized that I had no business in that major. I was in a way trying to force something that wasn't meant to be forced. But through that processing, I came to understand myself as having different kinds of skills, and those skills were being played out in some student leadership things. And I felt like I do much better talking one-on-one with people and getting into a certain kind of level with them that I didn't feel like I could get in another capacity. And so I switched majors and never looked back. So psychology was what I studied, and then went on to do a counseling psychology program, or a master's degree here in Philadelphia, and have been Philly, and then lived in the Midwest, practiced out there, but moved back to Philadelphia here in 2017. And I currently have a private practice out here. I call myself a psychotherapist, just to give a sense of more specifically maybe how I think about the work. I call myself a psychotherapist because I do like to do the work that is a little bit more exploratory in terms of intrapsychic processes and patterns, and getting into some real deep work. I tend to think less about things like symptoms and things like diagnoses, things like skill-based or cognitive-based practice. But so that's the kind of work that I do, and I really enjoy it. And it's been a really enjoyable thing to sit with people in that capacity. And I work with, I don't work in a Christian context. And so I get to sit with people of all different worldviews, all different contexts, all different kind of presenting issues. And it's a real privilege to do that. In terms of my family, you asked about them. They are my wife and 3 kids, and my kids are 8, 7, and 4. And so we're having a real great time together during this lockdown, and just fighting, kind of boxing out those dynamics that we hadn't had to deal with up to this point. But like I was telling you before, I'm really proud of my kids for how they're acclimating to the whole thing, how they're really adapting to it all. So I'm really proud of them for that. But we've been out here in Philly for a few years. My wife's family is out here. My family is still in Colorado, so I miss them dearly, and I miss the state itself dearly. I miss Anthony and Lisa, you guys dearly. So I'm really happy to connect in this way tonight.
That's awesome. And my husband's mom is here, and she says, "Hey, Ryan." So.
Hey,
You got your cheerleaders are here with you.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to go ahead and dive in. And like I said, if you are watching and you have questions, if you have comments, if you want clarification on anything that we're talking about tonight, please drop that in the comments. We'll be happy to answer those as we go along. So Ryan, we're in this situation right now where we're looking at this situational anxiety. And so why do you think that more people are experiencing anxiety right now in this season than maybe ever before?
Well, maybe just to give a little bit of a definition, or maybe my definition of anxiety as we jump in. When I think about anxiety, and I am going to do my best to not kind of repeat what you already know, or speak to the choir here, but when I think of anxiety, it's a disproportionate response to something that is a current threat, sort of an irrational response to something that feels threatening to a person. And so it's different than fear, where fear is very proportionate. Fear is, or worry is, about something that is kind of actually happening at the level that it's happening. So anxiety is our body's way of kind of putting up a defense to something that feels like it's threatening. And that could be something very tiny that our mind and our body are interpreting as very threatening, or it could be something really substantial, right? But our brain might respond just the same to something minor as it would to something major. Right? And anxiety is information for us. I think about it more that way than I do think about it as sort of a set of symptoms, or as something intrusive, something outside of us coming into us. It is information. It's very much a biological response, and it's in there for a reason. At least I think it's in there for a reason. The person who feels it really strongly, who is really kind of weighed down by it, or who is really facing the real unpleasant side of it, may disagree with that. May not want to hear that piece, that it's sort of a built-in mechanism, but I think it is, and I think it's there for a good reason. Evolutionarily, somebody who looks at it from that perspective might think of it as something that's been in us for a long time to protect us from dangers back then, and now we have it still now. But whether you think that way or not, it is a response to some kind of threat that we see in the environment. So so anxiety is information. How do we take that information and make use of it, as opposed to try to get rid of the feeling, or the sort of the physiological pieces? So I might, to the question, I might start by challenging it a little bit to say that it's real different. I think that anxiety is more so been given a new toy to play with here, kind of a new shiny toy, being the coronavirus, or maybe just being our vulnerability to the time. So anxiety doesn't need a real sort of tragic situation, or some kind of something explosive to respond to be anxiety. Anxiety is seeking to be kind of expressed all the time. So even at the most peaceful, calm times, anxiety could be present for a person. Right? When the world is at peace, a person might still be feeling anxious because of just how their mind and their body are interpreting something outside of them. But if it is feeling like it is more now, then on an individual basis, it might be. Like individually, you might be really feeling a lot more now than you ever have before, or than you do in kind of your general daily life. So that piece is there, and I think it's there because the situation that we're in is brand new. Is brand new to us. Mm-hmm. Part of the reason I might challenge the question too is because the ubiquity of something like we're going through, or the universality of going through something like this. People have gone through this kind of stuff before. Have really been through these level of transitions, or changes, or losses, or whatever before us. I think we who are living now have less access to those experiences because of just kind of the day and age in which we live. So we may not be able to see them that way. I think it's important to keep those things in mind, keep those perspectives in mind, because it does connect us with what has come before us. It connects us with what our grandparents or our kind of, our ancestors had been dealing with. But it also might bring that anxiety to a point where it doesn't feel so foreign, so out of control, so unprecedented, right? I think that kind of feeling might even add to the anxiety when it feels like no one has ever felt this way before,
Sure.
No one has ever experienced this before. I feel more alone in that kind of exceptional situation than I do if I think, man, people for a long time have been dealing with this stuff. I'm reading through my grandparents' memoirs right now, both my grandfather and my grandmother, who have passed away at this point. My grandmother lived to 102, she was around from just before the Spanish influenza hit to 2 years ago.
Right.
And just reading her, her reflections on things, there's like this grit. There's this strength to how she talks about it, or how my grandfather talks to some real significant, tragic things that have happened in his life or in the country during their lives. And so, I want to hang on to those things. I think those things are good to hold on to because they keep me grounded in my life when my 4-year-old feels like he's the worst kid or feels like he's really stressing me out and I don't need that right now. And these times are already stressful enough. So, and then I use that as perspective. So
I've wondered too, we're crazy planners here. We kind of like to know and be able to anticipate at least a little bit of what tomorrow is going to be like. We may not know all the details. We can't know all the details, but we know a little bit, right? We know that we're going to wake up and we're going to go to work and the kids are going to go to school. And it feels like we've got some things that we can plan on. And for us, I think our family, it was like, we don't have a plan right now. We don't know what tomorrow is going to look like. I mean, we do now, right? We know that we're going to wake up and we're going to stay home. But part of me wonders do you think that's feeding into it? That we live in a world right now where we really do plan out a significant amount of our days, our weeks, our years. Do you think it was that kind of loss of this sense of control that has elevated this feeling of anxiety in our culture?
Yes, because that's such a big part of anxiety, isn't it? That you are seeking for something to control.
Yeah.
Anxiety is really pushing a person towards finding that thing, because anxiety feels like something's out of control, right? Anxiety is a anticipation that something is coming, something bad is coming my way. If you think about depression kind of in the inverse, depression is more something bad happened and I'm responding to it. Yeah. Anxiety is more something is coming, something is pending here and I have to get ready for it. So in that anticipation, the mind and the body try to control something. Yeah. And just kind of search the environment for what can I control.
Yeah.
And we have on a daily basis had a schedule that kind of keeps that piece, that part of us functioning, right? And it's not a negative part. It's not a maladaptive thing to have a schedule and to be able to rely on that, because that is on some level a good coping mechanism or a good strategy for just living your life, and it does keep you grounded. But when it does get taken away, it feels like that was my thing. Like that was the thing that I was using to sort of live in
control, right?
Predictability.
Yeah.
The predictability. I think we have taken that kind of thing for granted.
Yeah.
That we can predict what's coming, and maybe it's possible that we're living more of a predictable life now because we are at home and like you said, right. Tomorrow I can predict I'm going to be right here,
right,
doing the same thing, but maybe more on a macro level, just the predictability about what's going to happen in the government, in the world, with that little virus that just won't leave us alone.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So Mary Lou here says, I don't think I'm experiencing anxiety so much as struggling with depression. Live alone, so not much real human contact. But I think the biggest thing that I'm dealing with is guilt. I actually feel guilty because God has blessed me with so much, while it seems like everyone I know and love is going through so many bad things. And I think that's a natural response. There's this feeling of, I'm really struggling, but then we look around and we think, well, I shouldn't be struggling. How do we kind of help people be okay with how they are feeling right now?
Yeah, I think that's the other side of the coin from what I was saying before, is kind of keeping some perspective on people who have gone through equally difficult things or even harder things. The other side of that is survivor guilt, that I am doing okay, and that's it's not okay to be doing okay, right? So I would just kind of automatically challenge that idea that there's something to be guilty for, or there's something to feel guilty for, that there's something bad about that, but that is a natural response to looking at how to the level at which people are really struggling right now. I mean, people are dying, and I'm not dying, and I'm a survivor, and how do I make sense of that? And so the question is how to sort of address that in ourselves, right? How to address that guilt. I think that there are, for me personally, there are ways that I was really struggling with not being able to do anything outside my own house, like feeling like I was just paying attention to me and mine, and there's a world that's really struggling. And so how do I help outside of myself? And so I think that looking for those ways to just reach out and be present with other people, to do the smallest of acts for people can be really helpful, because just doing something, like sort of acting in some kind of giving way when you feel like you're just doing fine and not doing anything with that. I think a lot of Christians are very susceptible to that feeling, because that's a big part of how we believe and how we interpret our role in the world, is to respond to these kind of things with service, with servanthood, with those sort of things. And so, so I think looking for some kind of way to reach out, even though you live alone, Mary Lou, even though you live alone, reaching out in some kind of way to give your attention to somebody, right? There's no, those things are priceless. There's no good measurement for how important those things are. Those things are priceless for being able to kind of act out of your blessing, act out of your resources. Looking for those kind of things.
Yeah. And then I think too, to recognize that it's okay to feel our feelings. And that we can't always compare to what's going on around us, because how we feel is very real. And so to recognize that that's okay to feel how we feel.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So, looking a little bit more here. So what would you say some of these symptoms are, that we may not realize are actually indicators of anxiety, especially during this time?
Yeah, some of the thoughts I had about that were maybe not nothing, but maybe some things that are also true about anxiety in general, but in kind of thinking about how I'm hearing it from my patients, or how I'm hearing it from, in personal ways. I think that there's some of those common things, like a tendency to isolate. People who are prone to isolate right now, by isolating themselves from others or from any kind of connection. Because one thing that anxiety can do, this isn't always the result, but anxiety often narrows a person's, kind of funnels a person's view or scope to themselves, right? So it might be hard to think outside of yourself or reach outside of yourself when you're anxious. Yeah, kind of put those horse blinders on, and you are very, very internally focused, or get egocentric at that point. So isolating yourself from others, maybe like a preoccupation with death. I've heard a lot of kind of signs of hypochondriasis or hypochondriac type responses. It feels like everything is a threat, right? When it feels like everything around you feels threatening. That you could just be sick, if anything, that you could be, that any little sniffle, any kind of little thing feels like it's the virus. And I'm not saying it's not. I want to be careful with those comments. I'm not saying it's not, or that that's nothing to pay attention to. But if it feels like those things are building and growing into those kind of feelings or behaviors, something of like a paranoia about the world, a paranoia about other people around you. And I guess just to qualify all this, like pre-COVID, these things sounded much more acceptable as maybe indicators of anxiety than they are now, because right now some of these things are actual threats. Some of these things are real pieces, and so I think it might be even harder to delineate between what is excessive worry or what is anxiety and what is really just a realistic perspective on what is going on, right? And,
right.
Of course, we have a range from people who are extremely cautious to people who just don't think this is a thing at all, conspiracy or but it is hard to delineate between those two things. So I'm saying these things with that preface
right.
Up there. I think if there's an increase of things like obsessive thoughts or compulsive behaviors, right? Obsessive thoughts are these intrusive thoughts that don't seem to be able to go away. That's usually a sign that anxiety is building or growing. You can't seem to get thoughts out of your mind, and that not much you can do to remedy that. Or compulsive behaviors where you find yourself, acting in patterned ways, in compulsive ways, and you don't feel like you can stop yourself.
Would you say kind of an obsession with news or information, trying to get all the facts and all the latest?
Yeah, I think that can be a sign. That you're acting out of anxiety, or that anxiety is at work there. Again, in another person, it might just be information you have.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
It's really important to just check how that stuff feels when it comes in. Does it feel like it is ramping up your anxiety, or ramping up your worry, or ramping up your paranoia about things? Does it feel like, it's good to know that you put it in your information bank and
sure.
you make use of it? So
sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. That's good.
Yeah.
What are some of the unhealthy coping strategies that you've seen people try to use to get through this time?
Well, thinking about that question, my mind went right to what do you do when you are either in your house a lot, or you have a lot of time on your hands? And what I'm finding happens for people is that they feel a real desire to spend a lot, because again, sitting in your home a lot, you have time on your hands, or you're just dealing with the routine of things, the monotony of things. What better way to inject some stimulation or excitement into the moment to buy that new whatever.
Sure.
So I'm hearing that from a lot of people, that they are just spending more money, and most likely money that they shouldn't be spending, or that would be better used just in case. But the same thing with eating. Again, you're home a lot, you have time. The access to watch anything right now. You don't even have to have a subscription to this thing, and you have access to all that daily. So people are tempted to eat a lot more, to eat excessively right now. So those two pieces are primary, I think, in how I'm seeing people respond. Some hoarding behaviors, right? Hoarding behaviors to really collect things that they don't need, things that are just in case, you know.
Yep.
I think months and months down the road, but if I need this. So the anxiety gets attached to objects here, where comfort is had because you invested in an object, right? At least I have that thing.
Right.
Or at least I have enough of those things. And of course, we saw that play out in a real negative way because many people were without what they needed because of an overbuying of something.
Yeah. Has anyone? I'm curious if you're watching. Has anyone made any purchases that you might not have made pre-COVID?
Yeah.
I'm asking for a friend. Okay, so with anxiety during this season, what might that look like, or how does that look different than anxiety in a regular situation?
Yeah. Let me just tag one thing onto that last question. I think it's important that the things I'm listing are the things that I haven't listed but are there for you that might be coping mechanisms and that aren't by nature healthy. One thing to keep in mind is that when you have something that you rely on for your kind of emotional regulation or feeling stable or addressing your anxiety or depression, if you've relied on something for that, just kind of cutting it off in an abrupt way is not the best way to do that. So I just wanted to add this piece that if you have that thing, think about the kind of the stair step down from that, or the incremental stepping away from that, the weaning off, because that's what a therapist would probably tell you or help you work through if you were doing this in a formal environment like that, but help you kind of wean off one thing and build a skill for another thing, so that your coping mechanism can be more healthy. Right? So if it is an unhealthy thing that you're dealing with, think about ways to wean yourself down from that thing and then input some new coping mechanisms there, which we can talk about in a minute here.
Yeah. It looks like we've had some purchases here. Kelsey, she's not going to claim it, but she definitely bought something. Mary Lou, nothing but boxes from Amazon. Like, Mary Lou, do you even know what's in your boxes? Almost like it just shows up. Mackenzie said that her son got bigger, better birthday gifts due to feeling guilty that he could not have the party that they had planned for. Yep, for
and
sure.
He appreciates that, I'm sure.
Yeah. So, okay, so because I'm sorry I cut you off earlier. Looking at anxiety during this time and anxiety before COVID, is there a difference? Are we seeing anxiety in people that maybe weren't necessarily prone to overactive anxiety before? What do you think is kind of bringing all of that to the surface? I know we've talked a little bit about it, but is there a difference in pre and current anxiety, or is it pretty? It feels like it's elevated.
Yeah. Well, again, you might be talking about sort of the width, the breadth, the depth of anxiety and how those things might be different. The quality of it, is it different? You know, I'm prone to say that it's not different, that it has a new reason to exist or a new reason to express itself.
Okay.
Let me just look at my note here because I addressed that. So I think that it might be the exact same thing, or it might be just another version of the same thing, just like coronavirus is another version of several coronaviruses that we have on a regular basis, but just aren't as threatening. You know, we've had it; it's been around. It's just not been this kind or this strain. So the anxiety might be similar to that, where we're looking at it differently. But I think it's the lens through which we see it that makes it look different. And it is, if it is different, then it's different. I won't challenge that if it is a different kind. But I do think that the brain and the body are going to respond similarly. So what your brain does with a threat during the last 11, 12 weeks here might be similar to what it has done with other kind of threats or other kind of situations you dealt with. So I think that the anxiety is, by way of experience, probably the same, but it gets attached to something that looks very different, or gets attached to something that has not been there for us. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about that a few minutes ago, right? The contrast between how most of us might live, which is in a place of being able to plan our lives and having the freedom to do that, and not having really many boundaries to how we want to live. I imagine I'm talking tonight to a group of people who have access to resources on a regular basis, right? So the contrast between living at a level where you have just unquestioned access, unquestioned accessibility to things like toilet paper, and then you go into a store and you see the shelves are empty of toilet paper. It's not just, oh, there's no toilet paper there. This represents something really serious, and so your mind and your body might be activated at that point to feel the anxiety or feel it to a heightened degree, because it's just that new consideration of the world.
Sure.
Like the world's in a different place now. That's how I felt when I walked into Target and I saw an absolute absence of toilet paper on the shelf.
Right.
It felt like not just, oh, I can't have toilet paper today, or I can't buy it today, but like the world has changed.
Right. Right. Now, does anxiety feed off of can my anxiety feed off of the anxiety of someone around me? Am I going to be, now I'm an anxious person anyway. So I know that if someone around me is feeling angsty, I internalize that immediately and assume that I should be anxious also. Is that a normal response with anxiety, or is that kind of just a prone to anxiety person? I'm asking that it is for me.
Yeah, well, I think an anxious person might respond in both ways. Might internalize what a person does, and then also might reject and let another person kind of carry the anxiety at that moment. So anxiety person A, let's say that's you, you're describing yourself as the one who might internalize. Might join somebody in their anxiety, or might feel like, oh, now I have more reason to be anxious. And maybe it depends on the person you're talking to, because whatever level of confidence you've invested into that person, if they're having a difficult time, you might start to question how stable you are. Right? If that's a person that you've relied on to be a kind of a solid person for you, stable person for you, then that might create some anxiety in you. And then the person maybe on the other end who's anxious might, I'm going to use this word, might unconsciously be looking to get rid of their anxiety, get rid of the unpleasant feeling of it. And so if they're around somebody else who's anxious, they would allow that person to feel it. Like, you're the anxious person in the room, that's yours, you carry that, and be able to feel the relief of it for a moment. Right? And then maybe later by themselves, it's back, because no one's there to kind of internalize that for them or introject that.
Okay. So talking about some coping strategies, what are some techniques that we can use with this extra angst that we might be feeling in this season?
Yeah, so some of the things I say here probably are very Googleable. You can find them. I think that the number one thing that I have been talking about with patients has been structure, because the I felt it, and I imagine a lot of people have, just kind of trying to recreate a new world at home. For a lot of us who have kids, trying to create just fill the hours and just create a new identity at home has been hard. And so I've really encouraged people to create structures of all different kinds, even down to the point of laying out the schedule for the day in very detailed ways, right? just plan it out. Plan it out. If that is helpful to you, plan out every 15 minutes and see what it's going to do. And you can't be tied to it to a degree that it has to be perfectly executed, but at least have a plan so that you feel more in charge of your day, more in charge of your home, more in charge of your children. More in control of those things, right? And part of the structure that I think is maybe number one in all of this is sleep. Sleep is just unbelievably important. I feel like this time has allowed me personally to sleep more. Right, I have the benefit of having kids who can sleep in a little bit. Who are not the 5 a.m. waker-uppers. So I just felt like, man, my body is recovering from, seems like years of deficit here. So I just, really been encouraging that with people. Is if you can sleep. This is the time to do it. If your life at home or your day-to-day doesn't allow for that, then do the best that you can. But if you can add a little bit more of that to your day, do it. So sleep, schedule, self-care, and what that looks like for you. The range is wide, but self-care. Some of that guilt that we were talking about before, it could be present here because if the world is suffering out there and I'm just trying to take care of myself, I feel bad about that. If my kids seem to want me at all hours of the day and I take an hour for myself, I feel bad about not being available. So there can be a lot of guilt from that, but that is something to really incorporate into the kind of your life right now. Finding some way that you can care for yourself, that you can give yourself a little distance from whatever your responsibilities are every day. I would say things that engage body and mind. So just a comment about anxiety. So the thing that anxiety tries to do is it tries to do. Our response to anxiety is to try to find a solution for it and just kind of act and do and act and do. And so we ramp up our activity and we ramp up the pace at which we do that activity when we're feeling anxious. And one of the better things for anxiety is actually slowing down. I need to slow this train down. And so engaging body and mind might be on some level increasing activity, but on the mind part, it's trying to slow the mind down. It's trying to calm the mind down. It's trying to just be present. So this is the difference between being versus doing.
Right.
The being is going to be a much more useful long-term way of addressing anxiety. I think the doing is more of the short-term. Right? I'm feeling anxious. I have this nervous energy. I need to do something with it. And I think that's really important to be able to sublimate that energy into something productive or something communal, relational, something that can give a sense of accomplishment. Right? But if it's not coupled by engaging the mind as well, then it might lose its ability to long-term be improved or be helped. My long-time beef with social media or with screens or technology, I'm careful with these comments too, because I realize that I just have a curmudgeon kind of attitude about these things. But engaging TV less, engaging screens less is, I think, will be really, just all around enriching, meaningful, deepening kind of experience. Right? I mean, with or without COVID, I encourage people to watch less TV. I never encourage anybody to watch more. I don't think I've ever said that to anybody. But to think about backing off some of the screen time and making use of this time to be present with yourself. I understand saying that. I'm saying that in a very generic way. What does that look like? How do you do that? But but in a general sense, I think backing away from kind of entertaining ourselves through this time and being more present with ourselves is really important, because that's part of what anxiety is a disconnection from ourselves. Some part of us is disintegrated here, and we need to integrate that and be more kind of human. So.
Yeah, I didn't. In fairness, I didn't tell Ryan that we were going to be doing this on Facebook because I knew he was a curmudgeon.
Yeah, I really had to compromise my values by doing this tonight.
It's good.
Yes.
Mary Lou says here that she has difficulty sleeping. One thing that's been helping her is deep breathing exercises, amazingly calming and mood uplifting. That's awesome. I have a horrible time sleeping, and the other night I was so desperate. I could not fall asleep. I found one of those podcasts where they're just supposed to read boring books to you so you'll fall asleep. They were reading to me about how to bake bread, and all I learned was the science behind how we bake bread. Like I know all of the science behind yeast and why it helps bread rise, and it didn't help me sleep. So
no.
Not helpful. Not helpful for all people. All right.
So breathing, yes, breathing. Like this is life-giving stuff. This is just basic stuff like sleep. So don't underestimate what just focusing on breath can do.
Yep.
So this gets into conversation about meditation as well. There's some real great, brain science behind what meditation does for us with our chemical electric brains. And it's so good for us. But on a spiritual level, it is unmatched, right? And it's a spiritual discipline, meditation, but it's unmatched in what it can kind of do for us, mind, body, and spirit. So.
Yep. I've been doing those breath prayers where you're breathing in and breathing out, and kind of being aware not only about what you're praying as you're breathing in and then what you're kind of releasing as you breathe out. But it also helps me be very aware of my own body and how I am feeling in that moment. Those have been helpful for me.
Good.
So Ryan, how can we help others who might be either in our homes or in our sphere of influence that are really struggling with anxiety right now?
I think one thing that I have learned just from being a therapist is that what matters is presence. And so I'll start with that. Just being present with people who are struggling is so much more valuable than trying to. There's an impulse that we might have to fix anxiety in ourselves, an impulse we might have to fix anxiety in others. And in my view, anxiety is not something to be fixed. So the number of times I've heard a new patient come into my office and I say, what do you need? What are you hoping to get from this? They say, I want you to get rid of my anxiety. I want my anxiety to go away. I'm looking for it to be eliminated. I have the conversation with them to say, I'm not sure that's a thing. I'm not sure that just eliminating it is a thing, because we also need to recognize why it's important, why it's good. Just like I was saying before, it's information. It is a way to connect with your mind and body, because it's telling you something about you. So anxiety is information that way, and it takes us out of a sense of being present when we're trying to fix it, when we're trying to sort of be solution oriented.
Sure.
And so again, if you're stuck in your home or you're not able to like physically touch people in the way you want to right now, that's hard. That's really hard to do. But still being able to be present with them in that struggle. Making yourself available for phone calls or texts or just kind of check-ins. When I'm talking with anxious people, it's the isolation that is the hardest time. Mm-hmm. Right? If you're anxious and you're isolated, it only feeds the anxiety. Well, it tends to. And so being able to put yourself in the context of another person is really helpful to, on the very basic level, just distract a person from feeling the feeling. kind of take them out of that moment, to be able to put them on with something else. Right? And so that's what presence can do. And being present with somebody is not just sitting there, but being present is attunement, and it's attention, and it's warmth, and it's support, and it's confrontation, and it's humor. That's all those things.
Yeah.
I think if somebody is really struggling, that you might encourage them to reach out to a professional, and without trying to just put a plug in. This is a really good time to be reaching out to a professional.
Yeah. Well, and that was one of my next questions was, how do we know when we can no longer manage our own anxiety and need to reach out to someone for help?
When I was reading through that question before, Lisa, my first thought was, don't wait to find out. Don't wait to sort of get to a place where you feel real desperate, because for the most part, we don't have to. And that's a case-by-case situation. Some people really may be feeling that alone and may really be that alone. But hopefully we don't have to get to a point where it feels like I'm desperate for something, or I feel like I'm, I might be in danger, right? Might be in danger of hurting myself or something like that happening. Yeah, I think managing our psychological, emotional worlds is not really ours to do alone anyway. This is something that hopefully we are kind of addressing all the time, is being able to let others help us with those parts of us, right? And so I don't think we're built for absolute independence that way, where we can really do this on our own. So reaching out early is good. I think if you start to develop some of those habits that you might have otherwise been uncomfortable with, you find yourself doing more of that thing that makes you uncomfortable, you feel like it's just the thing that's giving that quick relief right now, or it feels like it's the thing that's really distracting you. That's a moment to start to kind of look inward and see what's going on there. If you observe yourself, increasing some kind of behavior that feels like it's unhealthy or maladaptive, or could really lead to something that lead to kind of have a bad end, a bad consequence, that's a time to reach out. Yeah. One of the things I had made on a list before about sort of unhealthy coping strategies is, if you find yourself reaching out to people who in the past have been unhealthy relationships, you ended that relationship for a reason, but now you find yourself kind of thinking of that person again, or really exposing yourself to somebody who is not healthy for you. Those are some of the things I would highlight.
That's good. Okay, last question. So it's clear that this season is changing. Things are starting to shift. I'm not sure what it's looking like in Philly right now, but things are starting to open up a little bit more here. With a new normal approaching, what can we do to prepare for a new, different world? I hear people say all the time, I just want to go back to the way it was. And my response is, we're not going back to the way it was. We're going to start something new. Things are going to feel new. And I think there's again, we've got more unknowns. And so what can we do to kind of be proactive with that?
Yeah, that's hard, isn't it? To imagine that the world 12 weeks ago just is not going to exist in the same way. Because maybe the world 12 weeks ago was looking really good, and you were really excited about just the spring coming and the summer and all that was planned. And so this really is a time of loss in that way. And so to think that the world is not going to return to what it was is a really major loss. So maintaining perspective, this is kind of what I was mentioning before, right? Perspective on the universality of some of the things that we're going through. Just seeing the way that people do come out of those situations.
Sure.
You know, it's not just that people went through them, but people came out of them. And acknowledging that not everybody's coming out of this, right? Acknowledging that not everybody is surviving this time. That is the reality, but that people do, that we kind of collectively do. And so also shifting our thoughts from an individualistic way of thinking to more collective, I think is important. We are just taught to think individualistically. That's the culture we live in, and that's the world we live in. But thinking more collectively about these things is a way to get outside of our own selves, to get outside of our own minds. I think kind of globalizing our minds is a way to combat anxiety, because again, anxiety wants to just focus on you. It wants to just really prioritize whatever's going on for you in terms of mind and body. So always kind of combating that with thinking outside of yourself, the needs of others, the situation in the world, is really important. Right, so think collectively, allowing for some level of the grieving process.
Mm-hmm.
Again, loss, this is a big loss. So without grief, the mind wants to keep the old previous world as a reality, right? It will keep reaching for that former way of doing things. So if we are going to transition to a new version of life in the world, then we do have to grieve what was. Any kind of loss requires grief. So a grieving process, an intentional one. I mean, it may be thrust upon you anyway, but just an intentional one of being able to mourn what was and to be able to let it go, or to let it exist in our memories and remember to celebrate what it was, but to be able to move forward, knowing that it is something that is not accessible in the same way.
Sure.
And right, the uncertainty that you were mentioning before, it is a skill to be able to tolerate not knowing. And we're in a period of not knowing right now, and I think we'll be in a period of not knowing for quite a while. We're not going to know a lot. We're just waiting for our governors to say, can we go from red to yellow? You know, we're just waiting for authorities to give us the okay to do just a little bit more, and then hopefully next week a little bit more. Right. So we don't know, and looks like our people in power don't necessarily know either. And so we're all feeling that uncertainty. But there is a skill in the not knowing. You know, maybe it sounds strange to think that might be comforting, that the not knowing, or that you can feel comfort, or you can feel some contentment in just not knowing what's going to happen. That's not typically something we feel comfortable with, or that we want to have.
Right.
The anxiety does, in its pursuit of control, that's one of the ways it does try to control, is to know everything. The more I know, or if there's nothing I don't know, and there's nothing that can catch me off guard, right? I am as prepared as possible. So uncertainty makes us feel vulnerable, and that is a skill to build, is the tolerance, or the toleration of uncertainty, of not knowing, and of the vulnerability of that.
Yeah.
And then lastly, kind of what I was saying before, is learning to embrace a more simple life. You know, does that sound good to anybody out there?
Right.
It sounds really good to me. Again, based on my curmudgeon way of thinking about technology and the faster paced nature of things, I always want to slow down. I always want to turn the volume down, slow down. Students I used to work with would make fun of me. You know, they always said I was wrapped up in an Afghan drinking warm milk and aspirin on a Friday night. That's you know, that was my dream. But anyway, you know, that's my personal preference for things. But I think a more simple life has been shown to me and shown to a lot of people I know as a really appealing thing, because we've been forced to slow down, and people are doing pretty well with it. And I think the faster pace nature of things is not something that everybody wants, even though they might be participating in.
Yeah.
I think in a lot of ways we are pushed to push. We're pushed to live in a fast way, or to live sort of at a level of trying to achieve all the time, which is that doing. Yep. And there's some real beautiful things that come from slowing down.
Yeah.
So simplifying, slowing down the pace of life. Disconnecting a little bit more with screen-based activities. That stuff has the potential to be really, really enriching. So.
Well, and I love what Chrissy wrote here too, because she said, I think writing down all the things we do have might help because it can be a lot worse. So journaling and really reflecting on where we are, and because the world is insane and crazy. And so taking time to really reflect on where we are and what we've got, and being content, I think, with where we are at. That's good.
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts, Ryan?
Maybe I would just say that kind of in the spirit of what you're saying, like the ability to process the stuff is more important than trying to solve it, right? To have a solution orientation to all of this, whether it's anxiety or depressive feelings or worry, whatever it might be. It's more a matter of processing it and being able to do that through journaling, through a conversation with somebody, through music, through all different kind of venues. But yeah, this really is going to be a process, and it's going to be about sitting with the feelings. It's going to be about making use of them to know kind of what's going on inside of you, and building that resiliency that way. So.
Yep. Well, thank you all for joining us. Ryan, thank you. If you need help, or if you know someone that needs help, you can go to ehills.org/care. And if you are looking for a place to get connected, you can go to ehills.org/community. Both of those are going to be great resources to make sure that you don't feel alone in this time, and that you are getting the care that you need. So thank you all, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.